Okay, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, and dear fellow AIMA members, I am glad to welcome you all here to today's AIMA lecture. My name is Klaus Kropp. I am the current president of the International Association of Agricultural Museums, short AIMA, and we are pleased, as I said, to welcome you to this third, by now, lecture. We try to use as an association to highlight important world days with which we can connect our work in agricultural museums. And today, September 29th, is the World Day on Food Loss and Waste Reduction. And we want to use this lecture to highlight, well, the role agricultural history or historical museums or farm museums can have when it comes to that topic highlighted at that World Day. And I think it will particularly become clear for all of us how important museum institutions, as well as collections and open air museums, can be in this regard, especially by taking on responsibility and actively building bridges from historical context to these current issues. And in this sense, I guess there is nothing left for me to wish you a great lecture. And lastly, a technical information. We will now roll the pre-recorded content, and there will be the opportunity for a live discussion afterwards. So most of the presenters are also in our plenum today, so we can discuss everything afterwards. But now we will start with the pre-recorded content we use to make this lecture as smoothly for everybody as possible. So everybody enjoy, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with you afterwards.
Welcome. I'm Surajit Sarkar from New Delhi, India, and I'd like to bring a cultural context to the idea of food waste and loss. In the agricultural societies of South Asia, most food wastage or spoilage tends to occur during harvest, transport, distribution, and processing. And then there is unavoidable waste like peels, stalks, and bones, and avoidable waste of food leftovers. Wastage of food grains alone amounts to approximately 20 to 30 million tons per year in India, enough to feed about 70 to 100 million people. South Asia has had a rich tradition, one that we are fast losing, of using almost every part of a fruit or vegetable as food. This slide describes how in the case of rice, there is no way any leftover gets thrown. Similarly, vegetable peels, stems, roots and scrapings are often used in many Bengali dishes, especially in chorchori, a style of cooking where ingredients are either stir-fried or braised. In more elaborate versions, the head portion of a fish, which is often discarded, is added. This is truly a great cultural contribution to reducing all sorts of food waste. In 2013, harvest and post-harvest loss in India was around 12.6 billion US dollars, mostly because of the shortage of storage and processing facilities. These are being handled to make food a commodity, easier to get and in greater variety for the large middle class with its growing disposable income. Today, awareness initiatives channel surplus food to the homeless and hungry in urban areas. However, if capitalist paradigms prevail, profitable recycling can be prioritized over the non-profitable reduction of food waste at source. When members of a New Delhi-based environmental and social justice group, Chintan, spoke about urban composting, they began to think how more food could be used in the kitchen rather than ending up in compost pits. Many recalled eating stems and peels dishes at home and thought of a recipe book of that kind. Crowdsourcing recipes and working with a professional chef to ensure taste and texture, the dishes that emerged are a window to the culture of frugality. That culture is something to be revived. Sustainable eating is necessary not only because of the moral and material crisis of food waste and essential for a planet hit by climate change and resource depletion, but above all, it's a culture of great tasting food with delightful surprises.
Hello, my name is Deborah Reed, and I'm Curator of Agriculture and the Environment at the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan, USA. And I'm eager to share how historical resources can inspire us and help us document historic, contemporary, and inspire future actions to reduce food waste and loss. These help us make more informed decisions today, essential decisions for our future. Food is ephemeral. After planting, it ripens. After ripening, it rots. And ultimately, if not consumed, preserved, it will turn to refuse. This makes it imperative that museums document intangible cultural practice that based in indigenous knowledge and local practices and material evidence of that intangible cultural heritage. Archival sources like letters, diaries, photographs, and film, as well as artifacts, three-dimensional evidence of practices that people tried and tested, all to ensure that they could feed themselves. Analysis of this intangible and tangible material evidence leads to higher levels of thinking that interpretation through exhibits or living history interpretation or experimental archaeology can help staff and audience realize different ways of doing things, ways that can reduce loss, and that can ensure engagement in ways that move beyond passive program reception to action. Proactive collecting as a foundation for this larger public engagement. Proactive collecting can document stories not already understood through a museum's historical resources. It can, for example, document commercial aspects of perishable food production. It can document in visual form cultural practice, both of growers, laborers, and consumers. It can document innovations of the past meant to improve cultural practices, perhaps farming on a smaller footprint with less water use, done historically, transferred to satisfy demands in growing urban areas. Proactive collecting can also assess the consumption of these foods, the procedures, processes for delivering, and ideally determining healthy portions and portions that do not result in waste. But ultimately, at the Henry Ford, we also look at large-scale consumption patterns and the commercialization of food and the ways that this relates to this large topic of change over time in food processing as well as waste and loss. This range of possibilities guests encounter and we curators have to manage. Ultimately, we look towards historical resources also as a foundation of green museum actions. There are really two approaches to green museum actions. One, operational, which looks at an institution, its benchmarks for energy use, water use, and waste production, does waste assessment flows, and recommends policies and procedures to change and improve, in fact, operations towards green. But the bigger goal is transformation, looking at the ways that historical resources and those operational changes can help the public. And for our purposes today, that focuses on helping staff and the public practice more food security, eating less, consuming healthier portions, being mindful of composting, doing so in ways that take up a smaller footprint and that is more sustainable, and that models triple bottom line or quadruple bottom line business practices. Quadruple bottom line being valuing communities, the environment, and regenerative action with an eye towards ensuring human as well as planetary health. The Henry Ford does all of this in furtherance of its mission. Historical resources are a basis for helping people make better decisions for the future. Food as a universal language can ensure success in this endeavor. Waste reduction can be justified as saving financially, but it also can help save the planet through reducing greenhouse gas emissions, generating compostable materials that can then be used for soil generation. Ultimately, this better future will exist because we slow, stop, or reverse global warming. Obviously, this takes planetary action, one human at a time. And that past forward idea at the heart of the Henry Ford mission, I convey as historical resources supporting actions that will change the weather. Quite literally, we have to change the weather and thus reduce climate change, global warming, and its consequences. This is huge work. What are we waiting for? We need to join in the effort now. Thank you.
This is a presentation from Ollie Douglas and Isabel Hughes from the Museum of English Rural Life. In recent years, the Merrill has engaged in numerous activities with food at their heart. Few, if any, have focused on food waste specifically. Instead, they've been dominated by other overlapping themes such as seasonality, poverty, security, global justice, and nutrition. So before we look at current and future plans in relation to food waste, we wanted to look at various wasted opportunities to explore this topic in the past and highlight some hitherto unused resources that we could perhaps use in the future. Our main display is launched in 2016. One whole gallery is devoted to the farming year. Here, a digital interactive encourages users to make good decisions as consumers and to better understand what is in season and when. This would make a perfect location to embed further content on becoming less wasteful and to complement the wider focus in the gallery on sustainability, seasonality, and local sourcing. Throughout our galleries, visitors encounter content linked to food security, a Second World War grow your own food poster. There's reference to Brexit and the food uncertainty that it may bring, and a game that challenges players to feed the world's growing population from 1850 through to 2050. All of these narratives would benefit from more explicit discussion of food waste. In our online content, we share the story of the pioneering nutritionist Hugh Sinclair. We also have a student exhibition focused on wartime rationing. This focus on food in a context of austerity emphasizes a waste not, want not approach to food. A greater focus on food waste would be a logical follow-on to this, though perhaps digging deeper into the experience of those living below the poverty line, both past and present. Various projects have also sought to explore global food systems, histories, and prehistories. It feels useful to acknowledge that wastefulness is neither a new, nor is it only a global northern phenomenon. Reaching a better understanding of where English food and farming fits into this wider context will be vital in helping our audiences understand and combat waste today. In terms of collections we've not yet used, we might consider practical solutions to waste through historical examples of repurposing food waste in animal feed, as shown in this slide. We could tell the story of campaigns around global hunger and examine food waste discussion in these contexts. And we could begin to examine systematic challenges in farming policy that lead to waste, not only at the consumer end, but also in production. One example of this might be the milk lakes and butter mountains of 1980s Europe. The Merrill engages with themes like food loss and waste through the collections, but also through ongoing activities and programming. Our cafe products are not cooked on the premises, and therefore packaging is a significant issue, and it can be a big problem. A recent activity in the museum garden was a family event whereby 108 individual pieces of packaging were collected. The families learned quite a bit about waste from this exercise. As part of the University of Reading, we have access to full recycling services, including all paper packaging and cups, but the plastic windows in sandwich packs and potato chip and crisp packets remain a big problem. Obviously, our food is not grown with packaging. We grow food in our gardens as a community endeavour and produce it to give away to our local volunteers or visitors. We aim to show children where food really comes from, and we're planning to sell plants and seedlings in our shop in the near future. We try hard to gauge how much food we need on any one day in the cafe to avoid waste. The university organises a service whereby food waste is sent to a local power station where it helps to generate more power. Our actions are part of a wider commitment to understand better and then address sustainability and climate change by the University of Reading. Our sustainability services strategy includes a key theme of resource use and waste. Many people now recognise the climate stripes artwork created by Professor Ed Hawkins, climate scientist at the University of Reading, which show how global average temperatures have risen over nearly 2 centuries. The university has recently joined the national pilot scheme of our government's Department for Educational Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy, and this will involve acting as champions of nature and biodiversity for local education settings and wider communities, providing opportunities to share expertise in natural environments, and supporting other educational settings in developing and delivering a better environment for future generations. All of these are to be developed through the establishment of national education nature parks that embrace all types and sizes of space, including potentially our Merrill Garden. In partnership with our local Reading Museum and with Arts Council England funding, we are also engaging with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and this year we are developing a Green Stories environmental campaign which will highlight issues of sustainability through activities and online content.
Hello, my name is Klaus Kropp, and I'm the manager of the Lauersam Laboratory for Experimental Archaeology in southern Germany, which is an institutional AIMA member. I now have the opportunity and chance to talk a little bit about ongoing food loss and waste reduction strategies on site and put them up for discussion with you. So let's start off with an introduction of the site. Lauersam is an archaeological open-air museum, and it is basically a scale 1:1 model of an early medieval manorial site dated around 800 AD. It is dedicated to educate the public about the everyday life, manorialism, but also agriculture of the early Middle Ages, and at the same time it is supposed to function as a research site, especially in the field of experimental archaeology. All our concepts and workshops, as well as the entire educational program, is closely linked to a national sustainability strategy, as well as the UNESCO Convention, and as a central superstructure, so to speak, the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, or short SDGs. Transferred to our actual educational work, this means that guided tours and workshops are always checked and adapted for the integration of sustainability aspects during development phase. When it comes to the question of avoiding food waste and waste in particular, it is programs and workshops such as from flax to linen clothing, from seeds to bread, or our week-long medieval challenge for school children, which are intended to produce more awareness of the value of food and at the same time tell no waste stories. We also work along the same principles outside of the museum limits. Let's take the educational and research field for animal traction as an example here, where we not only use draft animal power, but also produce food and vegetables for the local community, and also to reinvent local circular economies. We produce locally for the local community, and we also sell the produce on the weekly market with a little stand we have there to not only inform the people about the value of food, but also to raise that value-added chain that you have when you produce with a face visible for everybody. We also try to apply the same principles behind the scenes. For example, we buy ingredients and supplies for our workshop offerings as needed from a local zero waste store, and additionally involve our farm animals when it comes to recycling surplus or suitable leftovers. This is how waste suddenly becomes feed. Also, with regard to the processing of flax, for example, valuable tinder material is produced from the fiber residues. Thank you for this short opportunity to introduce our strategies here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Hello, my name is René Claude Goulet. I'm the Science Advisor at the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Today, I will be giving a very brief overview of some of the ways that we have been drawing public attention to food waste as a key issue of our time through our communications and programming. The Agriculture and Food Museum is part of Ingenium, which is a triad of science and innovation museums here in Canada. While we're located in the nation's capital, we do have a national mandate to foster scientific and food literacy throughout Canada through our exhibitions and our programming by demonstrating the products and processes of science and technology and their economic, social, and cultural relationships with society. So long story short, we are a bridge between science and society. Our museum features exhibitions, interpretation, but is also a working farm. As part of our ongoing commitment to food security, food waste and loss is a topic we have incorporated into our programming, exhibitions, and all of our activities, and continue to talk about at the museum. Of course, the mission drives everything that we do, but as agriculture and food is a very wide topic that affects us all and covers so many different areas, it's quite tricky to narrow down a focus when it comes to programming, exhibitions, and education. In order to really focus our efforts, we look to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, food security is underpinning so many of these goals here. But specifically goal number 12, which has to do with responsible consumption and production, states that by 2030, the UN would like to have per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. How do we know which part of this messaging we want to bring to our communities and our visitors? So there are some questions that we ask ourselves in the background. For example, how is science and innovation bringing solutions to this problem? Which solutions or knowledge can we glean from the past? Which food science concepts can help people reduce food waste at home? What is relevant to our communities? What do they need? What motivates them? This is probably the most fundamental question. As we are a public-facing institution, our purpose is to connect with our audiences. So relevance is really important. Through our programming, I'll give a couple examples of things we have done. So by looking at reports, public opinion surveys, we can get all kinds of information to transmit to our audiences, to really discuss with them, to try to move the needle a little bit. Our first foray was a harvest festival where we partnered up with a community organization, which is something we love to do in our regular hours and our after hours, to bring in outside expertise, to develop those community connections with our visitors and these groups, but also for us in these groups. Hidden Harvest is a group that does some urban foraging of fruit and nut trees. So they were able to offer an urban foraging tour around the museum. They had some programming where they showed different types of nuts that are available in the region, and also, shared their mission and recruited for their teams. In our demonstration kitchen, which is very popular, we were teaching how to make everything but the kitchen sink soup, regrowing vegetable scraps so that people can have a second go at maybe some scallions or some celery. And we also had a little bit of information about mushrooms and their role in the whole cycle of nutrients. We also had an evening event where we were able to screen a documentary and again receive Hidden Harvest to write a talk. This was for a different audience in mind. We're really looking at adults, whereas our daytime programming is adults with children. For the evening event, we were looking a lot more at like systemic issues around food loss and food waste rather than individual at-home food loss or food waste. So we really targeted our messaging differently based on our different audiences that were visiting us for this. Now, that was a one weekend event, but we also infused the topic in our exhibitions into animated videos where we look at the science behind new technologies to improve food preservation. And also through our programming, through very, very popular vermicomposting. Now, this is a really interesting way to have conversations with very young kids. We can retain the attention using microscopes and little plushies and the worms themselves, and really dig deep into the concept of what is waste, what is food waste specifically, how can we avoid it, but also if we do have to create it, how can we put it to good use rather than sending it to a landfill?
Good morning, and here in New Jersey, it is just that. It's nice and dry. We're hoping to get our fall crop of wheat planted before Hurricane Ian arrives. But I'm Pete Watson. I'm the director of How Living History Farm in Titusville, New Jersey. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about a program that we became involved with as a result of the pandemic, and that led to our own staff's increasing awareness of the importance of reducing food loss and waste, not just in the community where we've been providing food to food banks, but in our own practices at the farm. I have AIMA to thank for that. It really raised and always raises my awareness of the issues that are important to us all. For the past 35 years, How Living History Farm, which is a facility of the Mercer County Park Commission located in West Central New Jersey, has grown potatoes for hunger relief organizations in our area, about a ton every year, with the help of school groups, families, and other visitors who plant, cultivate, and harvest the crops. The Trenton Area Soup Kitchen is one of those organizations and has been providing nutritious meals to people in Trenton since 1982. Today, it serves more than 8,000 warm, nutritious meals each week to people in need at 21 sites in Trenton and 13 community meal sites across Mercer County and into eastern Pennsylvania. In September 2019, it proactively embraced New Jersey's newly passed legislation designating the Thursday of the third week of September of each year as Food Waste Prevention Day. How Farm's support of TASC and other providers expanded exponentially in March of 2020, when in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the farm doubled the area dedicated to the annual potato planting and potato harvest programs, while simultaneously increasing production in its market garden, fields, and chicken house in support of TASC, food banks, and other food pantries that were in many cases seeing twice as many clients as before. During the past 30 months, the farm turned its historical crop and livestock operations, or rather it tuned its operations to provide these organizations with more than 40 tons of vegetables, grain products, and eggs, while engaging visitors of all ages and background in the related work and learning and the community outreach effort. This initiative led the Park Commission to appoint the farm as the mentor and primary advisor to its newest facility, the Capital City Urban Farm, CCF, a 3-acre parcel of environmentally compromised land adjacent to TASC. During the past 18 months, this new farm provided 10 tons of fresh vegetables and fruit to TASC and to local families who attend weekday pick your own days and Saturday farmers markets. During a press conference for the first observation of Food Waste Prevention Day, back in September of 2019, Ask Director Joyce Campbell stated that the garden was essential to its efforts to reduce food waste, citing the introduction of a salad bar with freshly picked vegetables that enable clients to make their own choices rather than receive and often not eat pre-made portions containing items they didn't like. She also cited plans to assist with a selection of vegetable crops, the latter to enable task chefs to prepare more recipes that would be enjoyed by clients from diverse ethnic groups. Task is also contributing to the farm's compost production and allowing the farm to use its roof for a new rainwater collection system. Hal Farm and Capital City Farm are working together to support a number of task operations and programs. The latest launched this past Saturday when, as part of Hunger Action Month, the kitchen began serving weekend meals for the first time in its 40-year history. More than 200 neighbors, officials, and other supporters attended that event, which was held at the farm itself and included tours, free farmers market, and a luncheon prepared by task chefs. In the strategic planning sessions that are currently underway, Task is seeking to strengthen its operations by reducing the use of paper goods in food serving and by reducing food loss and waste with the help of community partner Share My Meals. The community's needs and resulting collaborative efforts with Task, Capital City Farm, and a citywide gardening program that annually brings our horses and plows to Trenton, Hal Farm is adding new dimensions to the living history that it is known for. Opportunities abound for expanded historical farming operations, new interpretive programs, new outreach programs, and increased support for the farm's longstanding internships in sustainable agriculture. This presentation ends with a 2-minute peek at the work that's being done by Share My Meals, which is a nonprofit organization whose innovative work is giving us a better understanding of the challenges and the possibilities that we must embrace clearly together.
You can hear the
Share My
sound.
Meals fights both food insecurity and the environmental impact of food waste by recovering and delivering healthy meals in local communities.
And we always feel great about helping out Share My Meals and the meal recovery program when we do this. I go right to the QR code.
Food waste is a no-go. I think it's a no-go and avoidable. I'm burning for your organization.
It's really nice. I mean, there is so much food. It's unbelievable that this amount of food would go to waste if we weren't redistributing it. One time I went to collect food from a wedding venue, and we filled up all the trays and jars that we had. And even after that, there was food left, and that was thrown away. So we filled up to our capacity, and still there was more. So, but we still saved probably 80% of the food that was left.
I want to say to Share My Meals, I appreciate after a long, hard day of work, when I get home and I see the Share My Meals deliver some food. I'm so grateful that I don't gotta come home tired from work and cook, because they provide a nice, hot, warm, nutritious meal. So I'm very grateful for that, and I appreciate that so much.
At that time, my husband lost his job, but thanks of Share My Meals for the opportunity to receive food and get meal for me and my kids. And after I do This volunteer, I received the opportunity to do driver. They starting to pay me for doing driver. They trust in my person to. They think I can do this, and I'm trying to learn more things about Excel. Do a lot of things in the computer.
That's about it. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
And thank you, Klaus, for saving the program, and to all presenters who contributed really well-crafted commentary. And I think we can open it now. If we have any questions, you can put them into the chat, or you can turn on your audio and chime in.
I have a question for Pete about the Share My Meals program, because they kind of glossed by it. Could you explain the system that it had and the reach that it currently, the area, or what kind of organizations, and whether that's a model that can be used elsewhere, whether that's a shareable model that can be used elsewhere?
You know, I'm relatively new to Share My Meals. I discovered this as part of the, really interesting process of learning about food waste, thanks to AIMA. And, I've spoken with their director. We're going to have meetings with TASC and with the Mercer County Park Commission, but these are just some very innovative and generous people who are looking at a community resource that's not being properly used, or that has great potential. They're reaching thousands of people with a volunteer system that is very, very organic. It just seems to me like a wonderful model. I've been looking at their website. You can visit it and just type in Share My Meals, Princeton, New Jersey, and you can get the whole backstory.
Can you give a really quick, very, very brief overview and say a restaurant makes a relationship, they arrange for a pickup, just very brief, because it was hard to tell. There was something about a QR code and a barcode, and it didn't explain it.
Yeah, there are other videos on the site that go into that system, and one particularly with that restaurant owner who goes into great detail about how easy it is to use this technology to share, food from his restaurant. But they've figured out how to use the latest, greatest stuff that's out there to address a very, very fundamental need in what one thinks of as a very wealthy area, Princeton, New Jersey. This is happening in our backyards as well as all over the world, and to see it is eye-opening, and it's important that we do see it.
Surajit, I wondered, in India, are there connections between the organization that you described and different sorts of cultural institutions? So NGO and cultural institution collaboration? Oh, and you're muted. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, there are. And in fact, because the kind of, especially something like food justice, and reaching out to kind of niche population groups around in an urban area, it works. It works when a group like Chintan, which I was talking about, who created that recipe book, actually they themselves collect not just food waste, but also clothing, furniture, spectacles, medicines, you name it, books, and they pass it around, and they kind of take it to distribution points, which are groups, NGOs working in certain specific parts of town or among specific groups. So it's kind of reusing the same connections to take, connect people who have the extra food to be able to take it across there. They act as a kind of link. And it's not just in Delhi, but in many other cities. I think there are about 7 cities in the country which are kind of doing this kind of work right now. It's in fits and starts. It kind of got during the pandemic, it kind of became a more of a well-oiled machine. And now people who work with these groups, I mean, one can see it that they actually are working much better than they were even 3 years ago.
And Cosette, go ahead. Just unmute yourself.
Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm amazed at how diverse and finally dovetailing all of the presentations were. And I wanted to ask a question of Deb, in fact, because one of the points that you mentioned was proactive collecting. And I wondered, can you think of an example of something that would surprise us or that we wouldn't expect you to be collecting?
Well, I can tell you or give you an example. We have a Carver Carson Society, and this is Rachel Carson. And folks are well familiar with her trilogy about sea life and that biosystem and with Silent Spring. But in the 1940s, she wrote 4 pamphlets for the Fish and Wildlife Department. And those are about encouraging local consumers to look towards fresh fish and Gulf Coast and Atlantic sourced fish this is in the context of World War II as viable food sources. So that increases our ability to discuss the ways that Carson helped us think about food sourcing locally before she was working on the Sea Trilogy and before she conceptualized Silent Spring.
Thank you.
I have a question for René Claude. I hope I pronounced your name right.
René Claude, very close.
So, how has been the reception of your programming at Ingenium?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, visitors are very engaged at our museum. We have a lot of membership. We have a membership program and a lot of members with returning visitors. Being a working farm, as you know, there's always something new with every season. So it draws visitors, repeat visitors. And I think that is really where we see the most engagement, but also people coming from all over. We get, since we're in a nation's capital, we have a lot of tourism as well. So generally response is really positive. Especially working with vermicomposting and the worms. This is like one of the ways that we can really like connect with people, and where I've been noticing the most engagement for enacting change in their own lives. Often adults are a little bit stunned to learn about, the science of food waste and the things that they can do themselves. And so we do often hear people say like, oh, I'm going to try that at home, or I never thought of it like this. So often, since we're looking really at more the science aspects of food waste and the innovation aspects of reducing food waste, I would say like people are mostly surprised to learn about it. I think food waste is on everybody's mind, but few people really know what to do about it themselves. And so when we present, small actions that people can do, I find there's that drive to commitment from those folks. And because we see visitors often, some visitors will come back, we can kind of check in with them and see how things are going. So I think that's a really positive aspect of it. And most people, they will report that, it's a change that they stuck with, or maybe they tried it, it didn't really work for them, but they tried something else. So I think the value of the Agriculture Museum is really how we have in-person contact with our visitors, and really allows us to develop those relationships and long-term follow-up.
And Professor Rudnev has a question.
Yes, thank you very much for very interesting presentation and lectures. And please may I ask our colleague from Canada about vermicomposting. You are talking a lot about this, and it is very interesting. Please let me know, is it a very popular model because it is very interesting in context of sustainable development now.
So at a commercial level, it is not very popular. The university I attended had a large vermicomposting facility for the cafeteria. So it's done on smaller scale individually. There are some larger scale worm farms, but at the museum, we use it to recycle our demonstration kitchen food waste. And it's more of a solution for people that we recommend for people living in urban environments. In Ottawa, we have a lot of condo buildings, a lot of apartment buildings that don't have composting service. Though if you live in Ottawa in a house, you can have a green bin service. They come and pick up your food waste. So typically, the people we recommend vermicomposting to are people who don't have access to municipal waste management like this, and maybe don't have a yard to do a compost heap in. So our vermicomposting, our bin of worms, and they're specialized worms that eat quite a lot. You can have that in your house under the cupboard. Put your own food waste in there. There's no smell. It's very efficient, and then you end up with a fertilizer for your plants. You can make fertilizer tea using the worm castings to regrow your plants if you're having a little garden, a little patio garden, or use the worm castings, so the worm poop, to grow some new food. So we've been exploring that as part of the solution. It is not the solution, but it is part of the mosaic, along with biodigesters and other ways of making the most of anything that we can't use, like peels. At the same time, there's always ways to use things, but for people to make use of those things that they might put in the trash and would end up in a landfill and create greenhouse gases. So we also tie it in to that perspective of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from our food waste. We're looking at it from the global view of the effects of wasting food.
Thank you very much.
And Professor Starkey.
Thank you very much. Yes, congratulations to everybody. I thought it was really interesting, and as somebody said, it was a very good way. Cosette said, I think everything meshed in very well, and it was very good from that point of view. Declaring a bit of an interest, but I did like Ole's thing in particular, that it was very good about our institutional strategy to deal with this, both as a subject of practicality, but also for the education. So I thought that was particularly inspiring. And I was interested in Pete's presentation, and one of the interesting things that he made me think about was this idea of choice, the idea if you give people choice, then they don't take things that they don't want, so you have less waste. But of course, that only works if you have exactly equal supply and demand. And so actually, I suddenly thought, actually, the element of choice is actually something must be really interesting, the whole supply chain in all organizations. How do you get this idea of equaling supply and demand in an appropriate way? Because otherwise, there always will be waste or shortages.
I might just come in there and comment briefly on that, Paul, if I could. I think Isabel and I were very mindful of strategies and policies when we were thinking about what we might say for today, not least because we're rewriting various strategies and policies at the moment. And a lot of that is taking account of the sort of trickle down of ideas from wider university strategy. So we're part of an organization that's much bigger. We have to account for those ideas within what we do. I wouldn't say, though, that we are necessarily led by those strategic principles, and Isabel may want to comment on this too, but we're also influencing them from the bottom up as much as they're influencing us from the top down. So it's sort of important to understand how these things fit in. But the university is doing amazing work elsewhere across its food provision for students and the sort of wider commercial enterprises that it has on that front as well. And is working in partnership with a range of universities actually globally to better improve and make those systems more sustainable and less wasteful. I thought I might comment also very briefly on something that we haven't talked enormously about. It came through in the great work from Ingenium, I think, to some extent, but also in other talks too. But the potential for focusing on bioconversion more broadly, and there's amazing work in terms of contemporary poultry feed where people are working with breeding insects that eat particular manures, and that then goes into feed, and these feed systems are much more sustainable over the long term than the kind of feed systems that are used at a big commercial level at the moment. The thing about those, though, is that they're a bit icky, and a lot of this conversation is about stuff that's just a bit off-putting. You know, there's conversation about composting, which can, even if it's not smelly in the Ingenium context, it can be smelly. It can be attracting rats and pests, and conversations about waste food are just a bit off-putting to an awful lot of people. So I think we possibly need to focus more on really positive examples from the heritage, where actually these things were commonplace in the past, that they can be upscaled and made modern and made meaningful and sustainable in big commercial ways, and they don't have to be disgusting. We need to get our heads around food systems that were perhaps a bit icky in the past and make them less icky now. And I don't know how we do that, but maybe my fellow panelists have some thoughts on making things less icky.
I can quickly comment on that. One of the ways that we approach it exactly is we do notice that ick factor, but when we do vermicompost programming, children and adults are often, a little reticent, but by the end of the 15 to 30 minutes with us, they're in there, they're handling worms, they're touching the rotting food. So I think a big part of it is exposure and modeling. So when I'm presenting, my hands are in there, I'm holding the worms, and I'm modeling that I'm not grossed out by it, and kids see that and they're like, okay, so maybe I'll give it a try. So I think a lot of it is in how we personally approach it in our programming.
And I would say that as cultural institutions that stress the authentic, it's important to help people become very comfortable with what may be uncomfortable or icky. And great questions.
Support that. I was involved with an urban farm here in my city, and the volunteer coordinator turned around anybody's thought about something that was dangerous, like our poison ivy plant or some of these poisonous plants around us or insects, and turned everything around and said, there's a value with that. And everything she explained, the value of something that was icky or disgusting or what we thought of as harmful. And it immediately turned around everything, and I started seeing things in a whole new way for everything that she was discussing. So it has to do with who's doing the leading and who's doing the modeling, and how that person can be very comfortable, make us comfortable with what it is by just the very matter of fact but happy way of giving the information too.
Is there something to be found in terms of cross-cultural perspectives on this as well? For one community, something might be off-putting or unfamiliar, but for many others, it's an active part of day-to-day life. And I wonder whether we might all learn from each other and produce some resources through AIMA that could address that quite powerfully. I think Cosette has a question there. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to mention something that goes up to a commercial scale that has gotten quite a bit of publicity in France. If anything is sacred in France, it's bread. And old people, let's say in their 60s or 70s, can remember being frequently slapped because they let a piece of bread drop in the street. Of course, younger people, that never happens. But bread is always a very, very good channel and angle for this kind of thing. And there's a quite successful movement now for bakers to take back stale bread, which they reprocess in it's complicated, but the machines are quite simple. They shred and then they remarket it to put more crispness into both bread and all kinds of desserts. And this is something that, for example, the first people to sign up for this were the universities. And then the second people to sign up for it, at least in Paris, were the museums and the museum cafeterias. Now, of course, that's not agricultural museums, it's museums more broadly, but most certainly you can bring the loop back all the way around in your connections with innovative and relatively large scale commercial activities.
I think there's a lot of good lessons in here, and following up on Ollie's comment about cross-cultural collaboration, this is a nice launch to what needs to be a very self-aware and sustained effort to operationalize good practice and reduce food loss and waste within things that you have influence, but also to think about the larger systems, and that's where you get into the transformative work. So I think this has been a wonderful introduction to this. Are there any other concluding questions or comments before we call it a wrap?
I just want to say that I'm really inspired by our colleagues here and what's going on at all the different museums. So I'm hoping to take some of these lessons and potentially apply them at Ingenium here. Really interesting work you all are doing.
And I'd like to echo that and to thank you, Deb, for really brilliant organization, and to Klaus for technical solutions in the face of confusion at the beginning. But it's been a really brilliant session.
Yeah.
Let me just repeat that once more. Thank you all. And looking into the future, it is not that we intend as AIMA to not have another lecture series on the Food Waste Day. I mean, we can build up on what we have. So next year, there might be many more lessons we've learned we can talk about. So see this just as a conversation starter. And let's hope that the network we're in right now and other networks will follow up on the ideas we talked about. So thank you, everybody.
And one more thing to build on food, GLASS, that's GLASS, in agriculture. This is the International Year of GLASS, and we're thinking of ways that we can put information available on the AIMA webpage, agriculturalmuseums.org, that look at GLASS in agriculture. So stay tuned. That'll be our next announcement. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.